So all of us, I suppose, this week are engaged in the process of trying to make sense of the world in the shadow of coronavirus, something that affects everything, doesn't it? It affects the small details of life. How often should I wash my hands? Should I go to the supermarket? And if so, how often is okay? It affects our anxiety levels as we ask questions of both the present and the future. How can I pay the rent? How will the world be changed when this is over? Will I still have a job? And so on and so on. And certainly the current crisis affects our connection to other people, although only this week, this is 2 days ago, let me tell you, my brother's girlfriend works in the bank, and a woman came in and said, "Why are all those police outside?" And she had no idea. She didn't have a phone. She didn't watch the news. She lived away from everybody else. She had no idea what was going on. Certainly, that's an unusual thing. But for most of us, our way of connecting to other people has changed, as this way of doing our service demonstrates. I've had conversations this week with colleagues who valued online connections but found dodgy Wi-Fi, made it a frustrating thing. I've talked to people in family groups, confined together with the people they love, realizing that you can have too much of a good thing. And so it's a time of stress and anxiety and fear. And so as we're gathering together virtually today to express our concerns for the world and its needs, we're here to support each other and to look for hope. And so for our chalice lighting today, we're going to have a reading from Václav Havel, who was the last president of Czechoslovakia and the first president of the Czech Republic. In the course of his life, he spent time in prison under the communist regime. He saw a great deal of ugliness in terms of what human beings can be, but he never lost his positive outlook. And after his presidency, he hosted something called Forum 2000, which was an annual conference, and this is a quotation, to identify the key issues facing civilization and to explore ways to prevent the escalation of conflicts that have religion, culture, or ethnicity as their primary components. Havel was also a writer of poems and plays, and we're going to have our chalice lighting with a translation of his poem, Hope. Hope is a state of mind, not a state of the world. Either we have hope within us or we don't. Hope is not a prognostication. It's an orientation of the spirit. You can't delegate that to anyone else. Hope in this deep and powerful sense is not the same as joy when things are going well, or the willingness to invest in enterprises that are obviously headed for early success, but rather an ability to work for something to succeed. Hope is definitely not the same as optimism. It's not the conviction that something will turn out well, but the certainty that something makes sense regardless of how it turns out. It is hope, above all, that gives us strength to live and to continually try new things, even in conditions that seem as hopeless as ours do, here and now. In the face of this absurdity, life is too precious a thing to permit its devaluation by living pointlessly, emptily, without meaning, without love, and finally, without hope. So I wanted to have a sharing time at this point and just thinking about that theme of hope and ask you, what are the things that you've seen or experienced this week that have given you some sense of hope or joy? So I'm throwing it open.
Magnolia trees. It's Kate. I've seen somehow when I've been walking a lot of magnolia trees, and they always, for me, herald the beginning of summer, the end of spring. And that's given me a lot of hope, as well as they're just very beautiful. Thank you.
I was walking in the field, it's Alison. I was walking in the fields and there were bees pollinating the flowers, which gave me a lot of hope.
carry on that nature theme, I suppose it is the natural world that still gives me hope, because it's still carrying on doing its own thing. Birds, skylarks singing, buds coming out on trees. Just very beautiful and hopeful.
I think mine's a bit different. It's that I've made a list of 14 people who are important to me, and I carefully tick one off per day to make one significant phone call per day. And it's putting me in contact with people who I think of a lot and often talk to on email, but to actually talk to them properly becomes a real treat. And I'm enjoying that.
Well, thank you, everyone, for sharing. I think one thing that is definitely true is that for many of us, probably all of us, the current situation has changed the rhythm of life that we have very much. And I kind of want to think about that for a moment and share with you something by an American piece by the Reverend Lynn Ungar, who was talking about basically compartmentalizing ourselves in some ways to deal with all this, but also the sense in which the isolation in some ways can help us individually, but also in terms of making the sorts of links that we want to make, which is something Angela was really just talking about. So I'm going to share with you now a meditation by the Reverend Lynn Ungar with American spelling. These are not typos. These are, I'm keeping the original spelling. Center Down by the Reverend Lynn Ungar. What if you thought of it as the Jews consider the Sabbath, the most sacred of times? Cease from travel. Cease from buying and selling. Give up, just for now, on trying to make the world different than it is. Sing. Pray. Touch only those to whom you commit your life. Center down. And when your body has become still, reach out with your heart. Know that we are connected in ways that are terrifying and beautiful. You could hardly deny it now. Know that our lives are in one another's hands. Do not reach out your hands. Reach out your heart. Reach out your words. Reach out all the tendrils of compassion that move invisibly where we cannot touch. Promise this world your love, for better or for worse, in sickness and in health, so long as we all shall live. Thank you all for being here again. And I'm sorry for those of you having some technical difficulties. We'll try and iron them out, I'm sure, as time goes by. There has been a lot of talk, of course, in recent days about social distancing. And in fact, I'm just going to show you something. Sorry, elbow. So one of the early casualties in terms of social distancing were handshakes and hugs, of course. And what I noticed about a week ago is that the social media was suggesting lots of alternatives. Here's some nice alternatives. You can just have a look at that for a moment. Not sure how naturally some of those come to us, but there you go. If you can see them. So handshakes and hugs were early casualties. The newspapers also reported, and whether anyone saw this, a new and easier social distancing version of Where's Wally? Yes, you get the point of that. Because in difficult times, we do still need a laugh. Social distancing isn't easy. When Tracy and I went out for our daily exercise earlier this week, I did say it was a bit like being in a game of Pac-Man. You know, Pac-Man, where you've got the little yellow monster chasing you everywhere, and all the other people in the street were the little yellow monsters, and we were all trying to get out of the way of each other. But I noticed it started to get easier as the week went on, and people started to seem to get the message, which I thought was as expressed as eloquently as it could be by someone who advised, act as if you might be carrying the virus. Well, social distancing isn't easy, and arguably it's not natural. Indeed, there is an argument that it's not a good phrase at all. Early this week, the World Health Organization stopped using the phrase and replaced it with physical distancing instead. David Aldrich is a professor of political science and public policy at Northeastern University in the United States, and his research is all about how communities show resilience under major shocks such as wars and pandemics and natural disasters. And he said this week in an interview with the Washington Post. Some people think the term social distancing literally sounds like, if I had friendships before, it's time to hunker down. Or if I were a member of a church or a synagogue, it's time to pray by myself. But the COVID-19 order is going to be around for a while. We need to feel connected. And he's expressed concern in the current situation for those who are doubly disconnected because they're staying at home and they don't have the technology to connect with other people. Aldrich's research has shown that the strength of community cohesion has had an enormous impact in saving lives in times of disaster. He cites the example of a fire in California where many lives were saved simply because neighbors and friends called each other and said, it's time to go. He found that in 2011, in the earthquake and the tsunami and the nuclear meltdown that happened in Japan, survival rates in coastal towns varied dramatically based on community cohesion, based on the awareness that neighbors had of each other. Religion and worship are about finding peace and meaning in the world. And even in difficult times, the reason that I'm a member of a church is that I don't believe it's something that we can do on our own. We need community. In the book of Proverbs, we read in chapter 27, verse 17, as iron sharpens iron, so one person sharpens another. In the Gospels, we find Jesus constantly celebrating his connection to other people and famously saying, my command is this, love each other as I have loved you. And as I prepared this service yesterday, I thought of Christians in the early church and the fact that they existed in constant danger and under constant threat. But when you read the letters of the New Testament, you get this strong sense that it's a sense of community that's driving them forward. So in 1 Peter 4, we read, above all, love each other deeply, because love covers over a multitude of sins. And in Ephesians, be completely humble and gentle, be patient, bearing with one another in love. And to get back to the crux of the matter, let's go back to the Old Testament and the book of Ecclesiastes. Two are better than one, because they have a good return for their labor. If either of them falls down, one can help the other up. But pity anyone who falls and has no one to help them up. Though one may be overpowered, two can defend themselves. A cord of 3 strands is not quickly broken. We need community more than ever in this time of isolation. And I have to tell you that this week I have found myself hopeful. I felt hopeful because at work we had an online seminar event that replaced a physical one we originally planned, and more people signed up than I think would have done if we'd been in the university. I found myself hopeful because of the large numbers of volunteers who put themselves forward to help in the current crisis when the appeal went out earlier this week. And the numbers of people who joined in that ritualistic round of applause for the NHS also made me hopeful. And I found myself hopeful because on those nights when Tracy and I were doing our daily exercise, our daily walk, we encountered people who crossed the road to avoid us. But they said hello in ways that they hadn't before. And Tracy said something interesting. She said, this isn't social distancing, it's sociable distancing. And I said, there's Sunday service sorted out then. In this time of difficulty, may each of us look after ourselves and each other by staying at home where we can, finding hope and joy in the details of life, and expressing our connection and commitment to each other through sociable distancing. And with that, I'm going to open it up for any comments or extra thoughts that people may have.
One of the things that's given me joy or hope is running the online heart and soul gatherings. I've done 2 now. I've got another one at 6 o'clock tonight if anybody wishes to tootle along. And it's not just the connection of the people who attend, but it's also the connection with the much greater number of people who say they're interested, and I end up having some form of dialogue with. And that gives me the little sense of the Unitarian community doing its bit, if you like, to support people much wider than ourselves. And obviously that's happening in a whole series of areas in every street.
When you asked us to think about the theme of happiness, I went to look at the poems by Felicity. The book's called Felicity and it's by Mary Oliver. I'm not quite sure whether this is 100% relevant, but it's a beautiful poem in my opinion. And it's called Roses. Is it okay if I read it?
Absolutely, go for it.
Everyone now and again wonders about those questions that have no ready answers. First calls God's existence. What happens when the curtain goes down and nothing stops it? Not kissing, not going to the mall, not the Super Bowl. Wild roses, I said to them one morning. Do you have the answers? And if you do, would you tell me? The roses laughed softly. Forgive us, they said. But as you can see, we are just now entirely busy being roses.
So now I'm going to invite us to just join together in a time of prayer, which will bring the formal bit of our service to a close, and then we can have a chat after that. So let us be still for a time of prayer and reflection. We enter into this time of prayer together but apart, aware of how much our daily lives have changed in a very short time. We think today of all the people around the world who've contracted the COVID-19 virus, thinking of those who are very ill, bringing to mind those who have died, and all who mourn their loss today. We remember all who feel vulnerable and isolated, those living on their own, those fearing for their livelihoods, those who have not found ways to switch off their anxiety even for short times. May each of us be to those we know and love a source of hope and connection where we can. We give thanks for all who are involved in the fight against COVID-19, for all who work in healthcare in this dangerous and challenging time, for care workers, nurses, doctors, and all the support staff working under enormous pressure. For scientists who continue to research the virus, for policymakers who seek to protect the health and well-being of everyone, for all involved in the enforcement of the new policies under which we live, for people working in supermarkets, and all those involved in the essential work that must go on. We give thanks for the goodness that we've seen in people in recent days and the goodness within ourselves. And as our time of worship draws to a close, may we know peace, hope, and love in ourselves and share it wherever and with whoever we can. Amen.